Testimony is scheduled to resume in the Kimberly Potter trial. This after more than a week of testimony from different witnesses, officers, and relatives of Daunte Wright. Ben, I know that we've been following this trial since jury selection. We've covered it every single day, but what I want to focus on this morning is the testimony from the young woman who was in the vehicle with Daunte Wright the moment that he was fatally shot by Kimberly Potter. We'll dive into that, but first, take a listen of a snippet from her testimony last week.
And how were you feeling while this was going on?
I'm really nervous and scared. I don't really have a good past with police, so every time I encounter, I just get nervous.
So you were nervous and scared. How was Daunte behaving? How did he appear to be feeling during that interaction?
He was really scared. I've never seen him like that before. Because, Daunte, he's just really happy, he's positive, and you can't really be sad or depressed or angry or mad around him. And he was just so nervous and flustered, and I could tell he was just scared, and he just...
Okay.
I don't know.
The police asked Daunte to step out of the car. What happened next?
Memory-wise, I don't remember the scuffling. I just remember after...
So the car crashed, is that right?
Yes.
And then what did you do? You were describing you were putting your hands on Daunte, on Mr. Wright. Can you describe that part, please?
I took my belt off and I grabbed whatever was in the car. I don't remember if it was a sweater, a towel, or a blanket or something. I just grabbed whatever it was and put it on his chest, you see in movies and TV shows. I didn't know what to do, so I just put my hands over his chest and I just tried to hold it, and I was just trying to scream his name. And I was just trying to have him talk to me, and just kept saying, Daunte, Daunte, just say something, please, just talk to me.
What was he doing?
He was just I don't want to demonstrate how he was, but he just had his arms folded kind of, and he's just gasping.
This young woman's life will never be the same. She witnessed her boyfriend, someone she had been dating for a few weeks, die, and there was nothing she could do to save him. She will be coping with that trauma for the rest of her life. And the prosecution is being very intentional by detailing how this has impacted her, how it could have potentially killed her. The prosecution has been very intentional and also detailing how Kimberly Potter jeopardized the lives of two other officers and the individual who Daunte crashed into. It was actually a couple, and the male who was in the vehicle of the car he crashed into after he was shot is currently in hospice and has had declining health since. And so the prosecution is trying to make a case for a stricter sentencing because, as it stands, I believe if convicted of the lesser charge, Potter faces 4.5 years. And if convicted of the stricter charge, I think it's around 10. And so they're asking for a stricter sentencing based on not just killing Daunte, but putting all of these other individuals in harm's way.
Yes. And good morning, Georgia. Listening to that testimony was sobering. And it's a stark reminder of the trauma that people live with when they go through these things. And it happens so often. And you directly and we've spoken with mothers and loved ones of people who have been killed by the police. And it leaves a mark that will never be erased. And then what the insult to injury is, Georgia, as we're watching these proceedings, we see again that they're putting Daunte Wright on trial. And as you make that analysis of the prosecution strategy, it does remind me of how far we have to go in order to get justice for one person. The prosecution is doing their due diligence and bringing in all the other individuals involved. But I believe that there should be justice alone just for Daunte Wright.
Agree. And Ben, it was really interesting because as the prosecution was trying to make this case, and it's under, I believe, what's called Blakey, as they were trying to make their case for a stricter sentencing, the defense counters that by asking for a mistrial. And of course, the judge declined their request. But, this is that back and forth that we also saw during the Chauvin trial, where it's almost a disillusionment where the defense is observing the prosecution stating their case and stating that it's grounds for a mistrial. As we're hearing the evidence, all of it is adding up as we're observing and listening to the testimony. But here you have the defense that's saying, in fact, no, this is grounds for a mistrial.
Right. And this is there's a line. There's always a thin line between an aggressive defense, one that will do everything it can to make sure that their client gets due process. But we've seen in many of these cases, the defense will go, especially when it involves a Black person, particularly Black men. The defense will do everything and go far above beyond the pursuit for due process, and they will engage in criminalization even of the victim. So I'm not surprised to see this strategy, and I do fear we're going to see more of that and even worse.
Yeah, well, and there was so much evidence that came out last week. A lot of us didn't realize. I know even me. So I went to the scene where Daunte Wright was killed that afternoon, actually, while his body was still laying on the ground. And I remember being a little perplexed that there were two vehicles and no one really knew exactly what happened until this trial where they're describing what happened. And so the reason why there were two vehicles on the scene was because after Daunte was shot by Kimberly Potter, he drove off and in less than a block crossed over a median and crashed into another vehicle. Well, by this time, they had already called for backup. So there was a police officer behind the vehicle that Daunte crashed into because the police, they were on their way responding for backup, right? And so this officer was able to hop out and respond very quickly. However, his response was not one that we would recognize for a person who had just been shot. I want you guys to take a look at this. This, I think, so far, outside of Daunte's mother's testimony and the testimony of the young lady who was in the car with him, this was the hardest thing for me to watch last week. Take a look.
Officer Salvosa, when did you get the first hint that this was an officer-involved shooting?
Probably shortly after they had taken him out of the car, and piecing it together. As far as officially, not until they told me that I was a witness.
Sure.
And had to be...
Yeah, less than official. Did you talk to any witnesses that caused you to believe that it was an officer-involved shooting?
I did not talk to any witnesses that led me to believe it was an officer-involved shooting, no.
Not Katie Bryant?
I did talk to Katie Bryant. Yeah, she did say that she believed her son was shot.
Shot by whom?
A police officer.
And, so I'm not sure if we have the footage of the body cam from that officer. But what you see is he gets out and he draws his gun. That was his response to seeing Dante Wright's vehicle cross over a median and crash into another vehicle. He draws his gun for 8.5 minutes. He has his gun drawn and he is screaming at Dante Wright to put his hands up. And it was so painful to watch this officer who could have been rendering aid, who could have been saving Dante Wright's life for 8.5 minutes. He has his gun drawn and he's screaming for Dante to put his hands in the air.
George, I'm just taking all of this absurdity in because even on the stand, he's still playing this cat and mouse game. Right. Even in the heat of the moment, instead of rendering aid, he stands there afraid of a black man that's dying. Like, you can't tell me that it didn't take him but a few moments to ascertain that this brother was dying. But yet he stood there in his fear, because it's really hard for people to snap out of the fear that this system has instilled in this policing agency as it pertains to black people. In other words, it's going to be hard for police officers to all of a sudden see a black man as a human who needs aid when they've clearly seen us as villains all this time.
Well, and to recount that 8.5 minutes, I can't lie, it brought me back to Derek Chauvin. For 8.5 minutes, you had what was likely at this time a dead man held at gunpoint. You had a dead man held at gunpoint for 8.5 minutes. And so, when you start to think about the responsibility of other responding officers, and the duty to render aid, I also understand, I try to see things from both sides. And I also understand there was some communication breakdown between the three officers who were at the first scene, what was considered the first scene where Dante Wright was shot, that, they didn't communicate clearly to the other officers they had asked backup for. But whose responsibility is that? Is that the responsibility of residents and civilians? Or is that the responsibility of officers to be sure when they're asking for backup that they're clearly communicating to officers who are walking into the situation what exactly they're walking into? Because at no point did I hear anyone state that this young man might need some medical attention because he had just been shot. And so to see that response for 8.5 minutes, you have a gun drawn on a man who has a fatal wound for 8.5 minutes. I mean, any chance that he had to live, you took it away.
That's right. That's right. And we have to ask ourselves the reason why. Why did he stand there in that fear? And not to beat a dead horse, but it is the fact that this system has mastered the art of vilifying and dehumanizing black people, black men in specific. And so instead of realizing, hey, dude, this guy is not a threat to you, he's dying, put your gun down and go render aid, he stood there frozen in terror and fear of a dying black man.
And these are the protocols. This is the way that our police officers are trained. What we are going to hear this week at some point is testimony from the Brooklyn Center chief of police, who is going to say that in a situation of a fleeing quote unquote suspect, Kimberly Potter not only had the right to pull her taser, but he's going to say he's trained his officers to even pull their gun in that situation in efforts to justify her actions. And I won't be surprised if he justifies this officer we're looking at right here. I wouldn't be surprised if his testimony justifies him hopping out and holding his gun at Dante Wright, who's bleeding out at this point, holding his gun at him for 8.5 minutes, yelling and demanding that he put his hands up. And so when we look at our police departments that are training their officers to respond in a way that thinks about rendering aid last, it's an afterthought, and thinks about apprehending first, we're going to continue to get the results that we've gotten. You know,
Right.
The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, but expecting different results. And we've talked about this since George Floyd, is like really what has changed. And I think that is why Daunte Wright's case really struck a nerve in the country again, because this brother was killed halfway through the Derek Chauvin trial. So before the Floyd family could even get an ounce of justice, here
That's
we
right.
are grappling with another police killing.
Yes. And Georgia, there was a word that you kept saying, justify, 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 right? And what I've come to realize is that what America and this white supremacist regime that controls it considers to be justice is whatever they can justify. And that's what we have as Black people have had to live with in this country. And so long as that police officer can get on the stand and justify the murder of Daunte Wright, well, that's also going to expand the powers of the police and set the precedent that next time a cop is scared and they thought they were pulling their taser, well, it's okay if they pull their service or gun and kills you.
You know, the last thing I'll say here before we move on is Kimberly Potter is also expected to take the stand. She said during jury selections that she would be testifying on her own behalf. She will have to go through cross-examination. So not only will her attorney be questioning her on the stand, but the prosecution will question her as well. This will be interesting to see what she has to say and see how she does with questions from the prosecution. But what it brings up for me is that this will be the first time that a camera will be in her face. I don't know if you've noticed, but throughout this trial, even from a media standpoint, the coverage surrounding this trial is very different. We have not really seen any close-up shots of Kimberly Potter. Some people are saying that she's being protected in this way. With Chauvin, we almost daily saw a close-up reaction shot to, when he was listening to testimony, how he was responding, how, his facial expressions, things like that. In this instance, some people didn't even know where she was sitting in the courtroom because we've only seen wide shots of her. And so her image, the recognition of her image is not as strong as the recognition of Derek Chauvin's image. And I don't know if that was something that was intentionally done, but it's definitely something to consider. So when she testifies, we will all be able to see her. It'll be the first time that she's been in the courtroom that they've directly put a camera on her.
That should be interesting to see. I am very curious if that was strategic or if that was just circumstance. But I do see the impact that you're saying. The lack of visual recognition actually is in itself a type of defense.
Yeah, I mean, people have asked me, like, is she in the courtroom? I'm like, yeah, she's sitting right there between her two attorneys. But people didn't know because, I mean, you can barely see her on screen. She appears, very small on screen. And so we'll see, Ben. I know that you're tracking a story this morning as well.
Yes, we're following the 30 tornadoes that wreaked havoc and destruction in 6 states. Kentucky was the hardest hit. Arizona, Illinois, Mississippi, Missouri, and Tennessee, they also saw damage as well. Now, this is a tornado in December, a spree of tornadoes in December, which is rare. And per CNN, at least 30 tornadoes were reported. The death toll is increasing, Georgia. And so just ahead of the holidays, the South is reeling with all of the devastation that came as a result of the destruction. I have a clip here of Governor Andy Beshear of Kentucky on Face the Nation on what his state needs in the aftermath of the tornado destruction. He stated rebuilding of entire communities. And he said, we would have lost thousands of homes because when the tornado hit, it did not rip off a roof, Georgia. He said that it obliterated houses. Let's take a listen to that clip.
Before the tornado hit, you said Kentucky was short on nurses. I've read you're now short on housing as well. What kind of assistance do you need?
Well, what we're doing right now is opening up our state parks and welcoming in any family that needs help. But we're also good people that look out after one another. And we opened 11 shelters. There's only 6 still open because in times of difficulty, we open our doors to family and sometimes even to strangers. It's been amazing to see the outpouring of support from other Kentucky communities and communities around. What we're going to need as we move forward, though, is massive damage, rebuilding of entire communities. We're going to have lost thousands of homes because when this tornado hit, it didn't rip a roof off. I mean, it obliterated houses, just totally gone. So there's going to be a lot of work, and Kentuckians need to know that we're going to be with them, and the country's going to be with them, not just today, and not just this week, but in the months and even the years to come.
As you rebuild, how do you account for what seems to be extraordinarily extreme weather?
Well, as of today, just a day after, we're worried about finding other Kentuckians. We're worried about providing shelter for them. We are grieving with so many families, and we'll worry about or think about the cause once we have everybody stabilized.
Now, Georgia, obviously our thoughts and prayers and sending love to all of the people who are suffering in this moment. But that last question, I think, was critical. While Kentuckians are rightly, and across the South, everyone is rightly recovering from this tragedy, we have to look at the fact that this is a rare occurrence. A string of tornadoes in December causing this level of havoc. It is a result of what's happening in our climate. There's no question about it. But if we continue to ignore what's happening with climate change, we're going to see an increase in the intensity of these storms continue. We've seen the intensity of hurricanes increase. And we've also seen the amount of willingness to ignore the reality about climate change increase amongst Republican politicians. 2 of them from the state of Kentucky, Mitch McConnell and Senator Rand Paul, both senators from the state of Kentucky, rightfully and correctly requesting federal aid and the declaration of an emergency for their state. Obviously, that is all right and proper. But we do have to take in consideration the fact that these are characters who are actively standing in the way of us doing anything to prevent future storms like this.
Yeah, well, it's because it's cheaper for them to ignore it. And 9 times out of 10, their home has not been destroyed in a storm like this. And so, I mean, we talked about this during the oil spills and the wildfires, where a lot of these corporations who are contributing to the destruction of our environment, they will actually make more money, if they just keep doing what they're doing. Right. Even if they're fined, then actually stopping, assessing how their corporation could be greener, thinking about fixing some of the problematic issues with their warehouses. But that costs money and it affects their bottom line. And so most of the corporations we see continue to contaminate our soil, contaminate our air, and then they just get a little fine. And that fine, until the federal government decides to make those fines heavier, it's cheaper for them to get fined and for them to keep doing what they're doing. But at the expense of what? At the expense of entire towns, at the expenses of entire cities, at the expense of how many people died, how many people lost their lives in this storm.
That's right.
And, and so as long as they're removed from this issue, they're going to keep not prioritizing it.
Yeah. And coming up in Like It or Not, we're going to dig into this a little bit more, because when you mentioned the warehouses, it didn't remind me of the tragedy that happened at the Amazon facility during the storms. And the fact that these workers at Amazon had to stay on the clock while there was an active tornado warning. So we're going to dig into that a lot more during the Like It or Not segment.
Oh, well, I was going to say, don't get me fired up because I got a lot to say about that. But I'll digress. I just hope you guys talk about the phone ban that made it virtually impossible for those workers to know a storm was coming, or impossible for them to call for help when they needed it. And how Amazon is responsible for the position that they put their employees in once again.
No, well, hang on now, Sister Ford. Let's talk about it right now. We still have about 3 minutes left, right? So the way, and this is in the backdrop now. Now, this is in the backdrop of Jeff Bezos and all of his adventures into space. And while he is no longer the president and CEO of Amazon, David Clark he is, but this is the money that is sending Jeff Bezos into space, right? And so it is that type of oppression that you're talking about, the ban on phones to increase worker productivity. And then these workers could not even be aware of the destruction that was coming their way. And so they lost quite a few workers in the Amazon warehouse. There has to be some accountability, Georgia.
Yeah. I mean, a policy like that, think about your phone. It goes off to alert you that a storm is coming. Your phone goes off to alert you that there's severe weather happening near you. That gives you an opportunity to respond.
That's
that
right.
gives you an opportunity to go somewhere safe or to leave the facility, to go check on your children and
That's
get
right.
them to safety, and so Amazon, and it's bans on phones at Amazon warehouses that remind me why so many Americans are quitting their jobs.
That's it. That's it.
People don't want to be subjected to environments that are that violate your own humanity, your own ability to be connected to the world, to know what's happening around you so that you can respond in a timely manner, so that you can care for your family and your loved ones. I can't imagine. My daughter, she calls me. I don't care where I am. I could be in a meeting. I could be at work. It doesn't matter. My 13-year-old daughter, if I'm not at home when she gets home from school, she calls me. She FaceTimes me. And I step out for 5 minutes and I ask her how her day was and I make sure she gets home safely. You're not taking my phone away. I am a grown woman. I'm an adult, and I'm also a professional. And I think I can get my job done while also getting my job done as a parent, which is my first responsibility. The treatment of some of these corporations is so inhumane that America is not, I don't think, going to fully reckon with itself in terms of the great resignations until corporations start treating people like they're human.
I want to read this quote before we get out of here. This is David Clark. Just two quotes. One is David Clark, the CEO now of Amazon. And this is what he said last night in response to the storms. He said, "We're deeply saddened by the news that members of our Amazon family passed away as a result of the storm in Edwardsville, Illinois. Our thoughts and prayers are with the victims, their loved ones, and everyone who has been impacted." But a friend on Twitter dug up a little news on David Clark. While he's expressing these condolences at the top as now the leader of CEO of Amazon, when he was a manager in the warehouse, his job, he made his notoriety, his fame off of how many warehouse workers he could fire because he thought they were slacking. And so that type of mentality has gone from a warehouse all the way to the top of Amazon, and it is trickled down. There's no wealth trickling down. It is the oppression. It is the firm fist of managers that is trickling down at Amazon, and we saw the result of it last in these tornadoes.
Well, I know we are on the clock, so stick around for more. Ben, I know you're going to go deeper on this issue.
Yes.
For those of you guys watching, stick around for that and more on The Benjamin Dixon Show.
Set the potato, sunlight that always stays. It's that sweet life. Raise your cross. Made some dude crack a smile. He asked if I could stay a while. I'm living that high life. Time to catch a flight, but you can make me go. Unlocking all the memories of my new home. Ventilated echoes playing to and fro, back and forth, yeah. Caught some kids dancing in the alleyway. Crazy how the melodies began to play, yeah. Tell me how you feel it when you hear the lyric, yeah. My heart's in Stockholm. Now I never wanna go home. I left my heart in Stockholm. Now I never wanna go home. Shopping the girl, I brought a girl on my Vespa. She said I already told ya, yeah, yeah. I never dated a black guy. I said you're brown yourself. Let me offer help. Come on inside. Where everybody knows your name. Everybody knows your name. Time to catch a flight, but you can make me go. Unlocking all the memories of my new home. Ventilated echoes playing to and fro, back and forth, yeah. Caught some kids dancing in the alleyway. Crazy how the melodies began to play, yeah. Tell me how you feel it when you hear the lyric, yeah. My heart's in Stockholm. Now I never wanna go home. I left my heart in Stockholm. Now I never wanna go home. Summer to God. Sunlight that always stays in and by the waterway. It's that sweet life, sweet life, sweet life. I never wanna go home, go home. I'm living in Stockholm, Stockholm. I never wanna go home, go home. Living in Stockholm, Stockholm. I never wanna go home, go home. I'm living in Stockholm, Stockholm. Yeah. Shut up, I got the bed, the bed. Never get good, never get good, got good. Good, good, banga, good, 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 good. Baya da da ba ga ga da ba ba ga da ba da 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 da.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show.
Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back, everybody. It is Monday, December 13th, 2021. I am Benjamin Dixon, and I am joined by our producer, David Grossman. A lot of people always ask me if we're racist. We couldn't possibly be racist. We have a white guy on the screen.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning, David. And thank you for coming on the screen, man, because, you know, I